Hi, it's Tash. Welcome to Tash's Library. Today's video is going to be my July wrap-up. In July, I read 13 books and I stopped reading one book, so I DNF'd one book. 2 of the books that I read were on Kindle and 11 were physical copies. And I read 6 fantasy books, 3 science fiction books, 2 non-fiction, 1 horror, and 1 literary fiction. So quite a mix. Once again, I'm just going to go through them in order, and I will have timestamps down below in case you want to skip to a particular review. The first book I read was Hammered by Kevin Hearne, and this is the 3rd book in the Iron Druid series, and it was for the prompt featuring wizards, witches, or druids, so it made absolute sense. This follows Atticus, who's 2,000 years old. He's also the last surviving druid in the world. And he and his wolfhound Oberon live in Arizona and run a sort of a herbal shop. In this 3rd one, he undertakes a quest for a witch and provokes the Norse gods and needs to take some fairly extreme actions to protect himself. Basically, all the books have different pantheons, and it's really, really cool. It's got the whole mishmash of different pantheons. You've also got vampires and werewolves and just super, super fun characters. I really enjoyed this. I love Oberon the wolfhound. He's one of my favorite animal companions and has really great funny commentary because he can actually speak to Atticus. There's also a wonderful integration of gods from different pantheons, as I said, and a good use of earth magic. Very interesting storytelling elements as well in this one, which is sort of like a Canterbury Tales kind of situation in a few of the chapters where different characters sit down and tell their story. The book explores themes of loyalty and revenge and responsibility. And I enjoyed it. I didn't like it quite as much as the first 2 books, though. I felt it was a little bit darker than the other ones, quite violent in places as well. And Oberon features a little bit less. Atticus makes some really stupid decisions. But anyway, I'd still recommend this to lovers of urban fantasy. And if you're doing the bingo board, it does fulfill hard mode for gods and pantheons, because it has gods from at least 3 different pantheons that I saw. The second book I read in July was a little bit different. It was a horror book called Claimed by Gertrude Barrows, Bennett. And this was for the prompt Something Dark from the Bookworm game, and also fulfilled the Buzzwordathon title prompt, which was punctuation in the title. This follows young physician Dr. Vanneman, who is called to the home of a wealthy industrialist called Jesse after Jesse takes ill following a burglary attempt. And Jesse's found clasping this mysterious stone box that he will not let go of. So the doctor joins forces with Jesse's niece, Layla, to keep him safe and to investigate the origins and story of this particular box. This was a really creepy horror story, akin to Edgar Allan Poe, though not quite to the standards of a Poe. Very well written, engaging, very interesting characters, fascinating backstory as well to the box. Some very haunting scenes, which were very well done, and a real theme of the danger of knowledge. A nice short little read, and it's not an all-time favourite, but I really enjoyed it. And I'd recommend this to lovers of classic horror. I then read a non-fiction called Breakfast with Einstein by Chad Orzel, and this was for the prompt, a symbol on the cover, and the Buzzwordathon cover prompt, technology on the cover. This one explores the quantum world. It has chapters on the fundamental forces, digital photos, smoke alarms, alarm clocks, the internet, the chemistry of smell, the solidity of objects, computer chips, and magnets and encryption. Very easy to follow explanations written by a physics professor. Very engaging structure as well, because it's framed by the objects we interact with. during breakfast. And I particularly loved the chapter on the fundamental forces because he was looking at how the different forces work in the sun. And I'm like, oh, that just so clicks. I totally understood what the forces did then. And it was really good way of explaining it. There's also some history of quantum discoveries. Now, the magnetism explanations largely went over my head, but I've always struggled with magnetism. So yes, I might need to reread those again. And I also wanted a little bit more information on how the everyday objects worked. I think he just went immediately into the fundamental physics and then just a quick, brief explanation of how they worked and how it linked up. If you're looking for an easy to understand book about the quantum world, this is it. I then read a novella for the prompt novella, and that was Edgedancer, which is the book that comes after the second book of the Stormlight Archive, which focuses now on the point of view of a character from one of the interludes. If you know, you know. Anyway, so it follows this character with special powers who heads to a city on Roshar to protect people from a particular threat. And I'm going to keep it fairly vague because obviously it'll be spoilers because it's a little bit into the series. This was a very entertaining story with high stakes, great magic system as expected. And it was really nice to learn more about this particular character. Also wonderful continuation of the world building where we find out about a new city. And great companion here. So people in this series can have companions called Spren, who are sort of like embodiments of plants and nature, etc. So I'm just, once again, trying to keep it fairly vague. But this particular character has a Spren who is in the shape of a vine, and he is like the best companion character. This explores themes of justice, power, and compassion, and just it's really worthwhile and absolutely vital, I think, to read if you're reading the Stormlight Archive. Then I went to Alastair Reynolds and I read his Revenger. This is the first book of the Revenger series, and it was for the prompt light source on the cover. This was an interesting one, and I'm still not really certain what to think. I love Alastair Reynolds. I love that he really has hardcore science, understands science, and writes it really well. And so I'll always gravitate towards his books. This one follows Fura and Drana Ness, who are sisters. He joined the crew of the Minnetta's Morn, which is a ship with a group of treasure hunters. And they do so in order to pay off their father's debts. And they become bone readers, which means that they can communicate with other ships via these strange alien skulls. So it's a very dog-eat-dog space world. And the captain of this particular ship has an arch nemesis called Bosa Senon, who's a notorious space pirate. This one was, I can only describe it as a sort of grim, dark Firefly, because it really has those elements of that kind of almost steampunky space feeling that Firefly has. Great atmosphere, world building. You have that found family feel, and you have these little exploration jaunts to baubles, which are sort of these planetoids that hold treasure but are very, very closely guarded. However, there's a real subversion of tropes and expectations here, and quite shocking developments. And even though it's sort of almost reads as YA at times, and I think it is actually classed as YA, I might be wrong there, but it's just so dark and it's just so gory in places, and I just feel like it's definitely dark, too dark for younger readers. It is quite shocking, but dark space opera at its best, really. It explores themes of revenge and cruelty and human nature, coming of age, and survival. Now, I didn't love some of the violence, I have to say. It did detract from the book for me, and it also took a bit to get going, so it was a bit slow at the beginning. Persevere, though, because I think it's worth it. It's also a little less rooted in the science than Reynolds' other books, And I think that's probably something that brought it down a little bit for me, because I go to Reynolds for the science. But in the end, I will definitely continue the series because I love his writing and I love what he does with it, and I'm quite intrigued about the plot and where it's headed. But yes, if you're doing the fantasy bingo, this definitely fulfills hard mode for the Pirates Square. Then went on to another non-fiction called Dangerous Ideas by Eric Berkowitz, and this was for TBR Vet Pick. And this explores how censorship has shaped our society in its many forms. It explores the balance between the protection against hate speech and the protection against political revolt, but then personal freedoms. And it does this in a chronological approach. So it starts with the ancient world and then moves forward through the printing press and the 16th and 18th century revolutions and class suppression in the 19th century and war censorship, social media, and then fake news. And it mainly focuses on the West, but also discusses China as well, a little bit, particularly later on. And it does explore some of the ancient civilizations beyond the West as well. The chapters on the ancient world were fascinating. I really enjoyed those, and I quite enjoyed some of the more modern world ones, particularly the ones on social media and war censorship in particular during the Second World War. The book was incredibly well researched. It was he clearly knows his topic very, very well. But for me, I felt that it didn't have as much discussion of the sort of ethics of censorship, the pros and cons of censorship. And I felt like the greater focus was on the historical account and how it developed over time. And I felt also that the way the book was structured, by structuring chronologically, kind of meant that it kept jumping between themes within chapters, and I felt like a thematic approach would have probably worked better. So say religious censorship in a particular country and follow that through, for example, rather than going and touching briefly on religion in each chapter, if that makes sense. There's also a lot of legislation in this, which I don't find particularly interesting, and I didn't enjoy the chapters on the political censorship of the 18th, 19th centuries quite as much either. But if you are looking for a book that gives you a really well-researched, comprehensive history of censorship, then this would be definitely worth looking at. Massive jump. Then I went to Upgrade by Blake Crouch, and this was for the prompt Physical D12. And this is effectively Jason Bourne meets pandemic in the near future. That's how I describe this. It's set in the near future world, our world, where genetic research is banned due to a catastrophic mistake of the past. And we follow Logan as the main character, who is working for the GPA, which is an FBI-like organization investigating genetic infringements. And when he's working on a tip from a suspect one day, his life changes forever with exposure to a particular virus. I love the grounding in science of this. Really cool, particularly if you like biology. Highly recommended. Very engaging and thrilling popcorn read. It's that edge of your seat action movie feel. Great action scenes, very heart-wrenching and poignant in moments as well. And it explores themes of science, ethics, responsibility, guilt, redemption, and family. It's not quite as mind-blowing as Dark Matter and Recursion, so I didn't like it quite as much. And it also is an idea that I've seen before in books. But if you are a lover of thrillers, looking to get into science fiction, this is the book for you. And then I read Orbital by Samantha Harvey. Now, I read this for a Goodreads challenge, and because it kind of looked interesting. However, anyway, I'll tell you what it's about. It follows the everyday life of a group of astronauts on the International Space Station. So you have astronauts from Japan and the US and Britain and Italy, and then you have 2 cosmonauts from Russia as well. And it describes their daily exercise, social interactions, scientific experiments, and data collection, all while they're observing Earth as a typhoon grows. So I enjoyed the exploration of the humanity of the characters. I thought that was really well done. And the idea that being away from Earth kind of gives you the distance to almost become more human and more appreciative of Earth. If that makes sense. Also, greater examination of this idea that we think we're so important, really, but the only sign of us from space are really city lights at night, etc. And it does explore really interesting themes of connection and environmental responsibility in particular. However, I did not enjoy this book. It is not plot driven at all, and I am a plot reader. I love a plot. It's also, I found it pretentious. Now, I'm not a literary fiction reader, so if you are a literary fiction reader and you really appreciate really rich prose, then this could be a great book for you. I don't appreciate that, and I just found it really overly purple. Metaphors galore, things like describing the space station as a metal albatross. I just don't like stuff like that. I just don't enjoy it. Also, constant lists, which I think served a purpose to some extent, but I just found it quite boring. And then you have this whole listing of various countries that they're seeing supposedly from the space station, even though you supposedly can't see the countries because there's no clear borders. But then you have this message that Earth is borderless when seen from space, and all of that just didn't make sense to me. It didn't come together. I also didn't care about the characters. I was really not invested in any of their ruminations of life. I didn't care that they were sitting there, oh, I miss so-and-so so much, but I would never ever give up the chance to be here, so I don't care. I just got sick of all that. But anyway, that's me. But most importantly, this was classed as a science fiction novel. Public service announcement. It is not a science fiction novel. This is literary fiction with a real world science setting. And I think that's what got me. I was looking for a science fiction book and I didn't get one. So if you are looking for a non-plot driven science-based literary fiction book, you may really enjoy this. All right, moving on to a book I enjoyed more, and that was The Obelisk Gates by N.K. Jemisin, and this was the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy. And I just read this just as an extra book, but I think it also did fulfill a Goodreads challenge. This is, as I said, the sequel to the 5th season, and it's set on this supercontinent, the stillness, that experiences a 5th season every few centuries. And a 5th season is a catastrophic environmental disaster that brings about enormous social upheaval and suffering. Some of the characters in this series are origins who are magically talented, able to manipulate earth energy. Now, in this one, I'm going to try and keep it vague, obviously, because I don't want to spoil the first book for you. But it's a very menacing apocalyptic world, and I really enjoyed how Jemisin really sets up that atmospheric feel. She did that incredibly well. There's brilliant characterization. You're really invested in these characters who are not likable. They're really not likable characters, but you still really care what's going to happen to them. You're interested. Jemisin's writing style is absolutely gorgeous. And even though there's a second person perspective in this, I really enjoyed it. And I feel it really serves a purpose and really adds to the book. And it explores themes of prejudice and survival and parenthood as well. Now, this book is very violent. It's very grim. And I prefer the exploration of the various locations that we saw in the first book. I felt that the second book was more fixed in certain locations, which I felt closed it in a bit. And I think that's probably intentional because it really gave you this claustrophobic feel. But I did enjoy the first book a little bit more. However, I really love this book. I don't like apocalyptic books. I don't like grim books. And yes, so if you're looking for an apocalyptic book, this series is so good. And if you're doing bingo, this will fulfill hard mode for the parents square, because you have the main protagonist who is a parent, And then you also have the point of view of her daughter. Then I read Snapshot by Brandon Sanderson, just randomly because I wanted to read something on my Kindle. This follows detectives Davis and Shaz, who enter a snapshot. Now, Snapshot is an exact replica of a day in the past in which no one's actually real, but it all feels real and you can interact with everything. And so detectives go into this world to try and solve murders. So, for example, if they know that a particular murder took place in a certain location and they don't know who did it, they can go to that location just before the murder takes place or just on and then observe the murderer. And then they can send that message back to the real world so that particular person can then be arrested. So it's a very, very cool premise. I really enjoyed it. It was very thought-provoking, and it made for a fascinating thought experiment. And it also still managed to have a gritty detective vibe. Also interesting plot developments. Even though it's really, really short, I thought it was very cleverly done, very concisely done. And it explores themes of reality versus perception and also ethics. Now, probably what brought it down a little bit for me is that I didn't feel overly invested in the characters. And I think it works predominantly as a thought experiment. So if you're a character-driven reader, you're probably not going to get what you want from this. But if you're interested in ideas, this is definitely worth searching out. And if you're doing bingo, this would fulfill hard mode for Impossible Places. I then went to The Scar by China Mieville, and this is also the prompt pick a wheel. And it's a second book in the Baz Lag series, a sequel to Perdido Street Station. I unfortunately could not finish this book. I read the first 150 pages and decided to DNF. I know it's sacrilege because China Mieville's amazing and Perdido Street Station was an excellent read. I love that book so much and I was expecting something similar. And in some ways it is, but in some ways it just didn't work for me. It's very imaginative. So if you're looking for a super imaginative story with very original world building, China Mieville is your man, basically. He comes up with the most incredible, wacky characters in the most incredible, wacky world. And it is beautifully written. However, I had to stop this mainly because it had a really depressing undertone all the way through. I wasn't enjoying it. And then there were some scenes that were just so violent and so disturbing to me that I thought, you know what, life's too short. I actually can't read this book. I'm not enjoying it. I'm not wanting to pick it up. So I'm going to read something else, basically. So I'm just going to leave this series there. I don't think this one's for me. But if you are looking for more literary type speculative fiction and you're okay with grimmer topics, then very recommended because it's beautiful writing. Then, to lighten my mood, I went to Guards by Terry Pratchett. And I read this purely to lighten my mood because it's a reread. And this is the first book in the City Watch. It's part of the wider Discworld series by Pratchett. And it follows Captain Sam Vimes, who's in charge of the City Watch, which is a decrepit police force in the very unsavory city of Ankh-Morpork. In Ankh-Morpork, crime is legalized and controlled by guilds, so you can imagine being in the police is not easy, but things become a lot worse when a dragon appears. This was an ultimate comfort read, great characters. I just got it. Carrots, if you've read this, Carrots, the supposed dwarf, who's 6 foot plus, is hilarious. He is just like my favorite character in this. It's really funny. It's got funny puns, hilarious references to pop culture, a very engaging plot, so well paced that you just want to keep reading. However, it also has excellent and very insightful satire on human nature and society in general. And I think that's what really elevates this. It's not just a popcorn read. It's really, wow, yeah, that people are like that. And so if you're reading the subtext of it, and sometimes not even a subtext, sometimes it's just a blatant, this is what people are like. And that's what I love about it. So if you're looking for lighthearted fantasy with good satire in it, highly recommended. And if you're doing bingo, this was published in 1989, but it's not hard mode, obviously. But, you know, it would fulfill the normal mode. Then I went on to read Strange Beasts by Susan J. Morris, which is the first book in the Harker and Moriarty series. I picked this up just because I'd finished my TBR and decided to read a few more books. It follows Samantha Harker, who's daughter of Jonathan Harker, who was Dracula's killer. And then you also follow Helena Moriarty, who is the daughter of Professor Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes. And they work for the Royal Society for the Study of Abnormal Phenomena. And they sent to Paris to investigate the savage murders of some prominent men. But they also have their own secrets. This is really cool. This is a gaslamp world of terrifying monsters, alchemy, secret societies. It's got a great setting, so it's Paris. Gorgeous, atmospheric. You've got the chilling catacombs, the glittering opera house. The main characters are really well developed. I really enjoyed them. They are very likable, even though you sometimes want to throttle them for the decisions they make. And there is a supernatural murder mystery, which is very well plotted, exciting and twisty. And it does explore themes of class structure and conformity. I feel that the relationship in this lacked chemistry for me. And note that it's not a romance, but it definitely has a little bit of a romantic subtext in there. Also, there's one specific sequence, and I can't be more specific, but there is an event that happens that made no sense in the story for me. I didn't feel like it added to it. But my biggest gripe with this book, and it sounds really weird, is that all the men in this book are stereotypical cardboard characters who are despicable human beings. And I felt that it's almost like the men in this book purely existed to disparage men. And that's not to say some men don't deserve it. It's just that I don't like that kind of blanket coverage. I like people being judged as individuals, and so I don't like the whole let's just class this group as bad. I don't enjoy that in books. It doesn't even matter what group is classed as bad. I just don't like it. And I just feel that detracted and made it a little less realistic to me. However, I still loved this. I gave this 4 stars. It was a really good read. And if you're seeking stories connected to the stories like Dracula and Sherlock Holmes, or you love gaslamp fantasies, I'd recommend giving this a try. And the final book I read was Blameless by Gail, which is the 3rd book in the Parasol Protectorate series. And this is set in alternate Victorian London inhabited by vampires and werewolves. Alexia Tarabody's our protagonist, and she's a 26-year-old preternatural, which means that she's capable of removing supernatural powers from others with a touch, at least temporarily. Alexia in this one travels to Florence. I love Alexia. She's a feisty, independent, multi-layered character. She also has fabulous supporting characters. The plots are always fun in these. It's very funny in places. And this particular book really explores the themes of trust, friendship, prejudice. And it's my favorite so far in the series. I really enjoyed the first 2 books, but this one's definitely my favorite so far. The only thing that I didn't love in this one is Lord Macon, who's one of the werewolves in this, is a little melodramatic and made some really stupid choices and was highly impulsive, but it's within character, so it made sense. And I also felt that the ending was a little bit rushed. But really, if you love urban fantasy with a touch of romance and a lot of supernatural beings, I highly recommend this series. And finally, I read my 3 short stories. The first one was The Man Who Lost The Sea by Theodore Sturgeon. And this is a story about memory and trauma. So very interesting narrative that's initially a little bit confusing, but is sort of building up through fractured memories. I gave this 4 stars for ideas. I really liked the ideas, and I also gave it 4 stars for enjoyment. I really enjoyed piecing together the story. Then I had Tlon Ukbar Orbis Tertius by George Louis Borges. I actually DNF'd this. I tried for a little while, but I found it really boring. There was a lot of focus on linguistics, etc. So I'm not even going to talk about that one. And then the final one was Rachel in Love by Pat Murphy. And this is a story about a chimpanzee with a girl's brain exploring ethics. Ideas in this were top notch, 5 star in terms of ideas. It was really, really well thought out, great thought experiments. Enjoyment was a bit lower for me, mainly because there were some things in it that were a bit disturbing. That is it. That was my insanely packed July reading month. Tell me what your favorite book of July was. Mine was very clearly Guards. Surprise, surprise. But yes, thank you for watching a very long video, I'm guessing, at this stage. And until I see you next time, take care.